Launch Your Classroom, how can I help you?
Kyle, it's a new year for Launch Your Classroom. I have a special mission for you.
Excuse me, but who is this?
Oh, sorry, this is Johnny from the Q&A.
Oh, hey, Johnny.
Hey, Kyle. Like I was saying, I have a special mission for you. We've been receiving some great questions in the chat, our social media channels, and emails about a very important topic. I need you to put together a small group.
What's the topic?
Small groups.
Actually, I have the perfect people in mind. There's Heather, a master of work-life balance and the star of Launch Your Classroom. There's Rachel, a champion of the community and a compassionate communicator. There's Samuel, a prodigy in the science of education who is always there to provide us with support. And then there's me. Hey, why didn't you just send me a text?
Suit up! 4 team members, less than 30 minutes, one mission, to teach the world about managing small groups in the classroom.
Welcome to Launch Your Classroom. I'm Kyle Pope. Student groups. What do you think about when you hear those 2 words? Do you see them as a valuable teaching tool that encourages multi-participant problem solving? Or do you conjure up images of wild packs of students talking loudly about everything except your lesson? I've certainly seen both versions, maybe even in my own classroom. Yes, student groups can be difficult to manage, especially when you aren't properly prepared. You have to deal with friends trying to be grouped together, getting students to focus on the assignment rather than their social lives, and there always seems to be that one student who tries to get away with doing nothing while everyone else works. But when student groups are well managed, they take your class to a higher level. This type of student-centered learning promotes critical thinking, makes the lesson more engaging, and allows students to get out their talkative energy in a productive way. Maybe you've had some bad luck with groups in the past, or maybe you've used them with some success and are looking for a few ways to improve moving forward. Well, you're in luck, because today we're talking about how to structure and manage your groups to create a meaningful learning experience.
Student group activities can be great for increasing interaction and engagement in your classroom, but you want to make sure that when the time comes to actually create the groups themselves, you do it intentionally. Your classroom is filled with different kinds of learners. Some may be high achievers, some may need remediation. Some may be great listeners, and another may be a kinesthetic learner. One student might shine when speaking in front of the class, and this one might rather have others do the talking for them. So how do we group them? Well, there's 2 schools of thought. Homogeneous groups place similar learners together. This is a great way to differentiate an assignment among different proficiency levels. If you're doing a math assignment and you know that these green students are further along in the material than these blue ones, you can give the blue group an assignment appropriate to their academic level. Sometimes these groups might be officially mandated by the school, district, or state, as in the case with reading levels in some elementary grades. Once you get to know your students and their interests, you can occasionally create homogeneous groups based on what they enjoy doing. This can be a great reward if you know that the yellow group loves doing skits and performing, and the pink group enjoys drawing and art. In a heterogeneous group, different types of learners are grouped together. One of the main advantages of a heterogeneous group is the potential for peer mentoring. In a group like this, a struggling student has the opportunity to work with and learn from a higher achieving student. With a mixed group like this, you also don't need to differentiate your assignment. Having students of different achievement levels, learning styles, and interests is also great for creating a positive classroom culture of inclusion. The important thing to remember is that there is no right answer for how to create student groups. There are times when a homogeneous group is the best choice, and sometimes a heterogeneous group would be better. Be intentional and choose the group that best fits your classroom objectives.
So you formed your groups and you're prepared for your group activity. There's one other thing to consider before getting started: group roles. Every member of a student group needs to have a responsibility above and beyond the completion of the actual assignment. These well-defined roles ensure that each student is accountable to each other and the group as a whole. Let's cover the 4 most essential group roles first. Okay, gang, why don't you introduce yourselves?
I'm the organizer. I make sure the group stays on track by keeping the time and making sure that all materials are collected and returned after the assignment. I also help team members come to a common consensus when there is a disagreement.
I'm the recorder. Since I'm in charge of writing down the group's answers and recording out progress, I'm also called the scribe. Sometimes I keep track of who contributed what to the project as well.
I'm the reporter. I am the group's spokesperson when it's time to present our results to the class. If our team needs to ask the teacher something about the assignment, I'm the one that raises my hand and asks the question.
Thanks, everyone. And I am the leader. Sometimes I'm called the facilitator because it's my job to make it easy for everyone to participate in the activity. I ensure that everybody's on task, focused, and that everyone gets a chance to talk. Once again, these are the most essential roles you'll find in small groups. You'll want to mix these up so everyone gets a chance to fulfill each role. And depending on your grade level and student circumstances, you may want to consider some other specialized roles, such as
the checker, who checks the group's work for completion or any errors.
The encourager, who keeps morale high in the group by cheering the group towards success.
Remember, these roles are to hold your students accountable and help facilitate the completion of the assignment. Every member of the group should be also contributing to the tasks. A great way to help your students organize and help yourselves monitor their work is through the use of a group task sheet.
The group task sheet is an essential tool to use for multi-step group activities. It serves as a guide for students to complete an assignment and also works as a great management tool for you to use as a teacher. The first 2 items on the sheet, the assignment's name and the materials needed, will need to be typed in by you prior to the assignment. Then, the group members will write their names down beside their designated roles. Below, you can see a simple step-by-step table. On the left, you'll find the step number. 1 column over, you'll see your task list. Try to keep your instructions clear and to the point in this section. Moving over, you'll find a space for the students to write their name if they were involved with completing that step. This is for added accountability. And on the far right, you'll have the students check off the step once it has been completed. As you're monitoring the class during group work, this is a great way to quickly be able to gauge where each group is on their way to completing the assignment. When the students have finished every step, make sure that you collect the task sheet along with the finished group product.
Every class should have rules and procedures, but group work presents its own challenges and therefore needs its own specific rules and procedures and even norms. Let's talk about rules for groups first. These should be created by the teacher and detail your most important behavioral expectations. Just like with your regular rules, you'll want to phrase these positively and keep them to a manageable number like 5. Remember that rules should have consequences for not following them. One rule I find essential for group work is students must speak at a conversational level. Of course, you'll need to define what this sounds like, especially for your younger students. Next, there are procedures. Once again, these should be created by the teacher. Procedures are used to make your group work both organized and efficient. Usually in groups, there's some movement involved, so this is a good topic to start with when creating your procedures. For example, a good procedure to have is students will move desks back to their original positions after the group activity is completed. Lastly, we have group norms. Norms are created by the students within their own groups. This helps to create accountability to one another and gets them involved in the overall group process. These could include things such as work will be divided evenly, or we will not interrupt each other. Now that we've covered rules, norms, and procedures, let's see how we can organize all of these important items for our students with group folders.
The key to keeping student group activities on task and running smoothly is organization, both for you and your students. Distributing and collecting activity materials, assigning group roles to students, and reminding them of rules and procedures take up valuable activity time. Here's a great way to keep everything organized: the group activity folder. Start with a simple 3-ring binder. Before you head to an office supply store, try an online retailer, as you may be able to get a better deal. Also, check with your school, as they may have some extras that you can use. Fill the left pocket with materials that are always going to be the same, no matter the assignment. This includes a copy of your classroom's group rules, procedures, and norms, and an explanation of the different group roles. I like to make cards for each role with the names and responsibilities below. If you use a group reward system, include the rules for how to get points. Since you will reuse the items in the left pocket for every assignment, you might want to laminate them, but it's not required. In the middle, clip in a plastic sleeve. Here's where you'll put your group assignment and where your students will submit their finished work. The right pocket is where you'll include materials that are specific to this assignment. Make sure that you include your group task sheet, as well as some starter questions for your post-activity assessment. Finally, put a label on the front of the folder to indicate which folder belongs to which group. As always, letting your students come up with a group name can help keep them engaged. With that, your group activity folder is complete. You can store these with your other materials in your classroom, and when it's time for a student group assignment, have one representative from each group come up to collect the folder.
Your students have finished their group work, the assignment is complete, and it's time to move on, right? Although sometimes this might be true due to the reality of pacing restraints, if at all possible, you should have some form of post-activity assessment. This will provide you with a formative assessment to make sure that all of your groups understand the most important concepts in your curriculum. In addition, it offers an opportunity for students to share what they've learned with each other and even do some peer teaching. Oh, hey Samuel, I was just talking about formative assessments for post-group activities.
Oh, what a great topic.
Yeah, do you happen to have a favorite?
I actually do. It's called the fishbowl.
That's a great one. Would you like to help me explain it?
Sure. So to set up the fishbowl, you'll need an inner and an outer circle of desks. The inner circle should have one seat for each group. For example, like in the graphic you're looking at now, if you have 6 groups, you'll need 6 chairs. The outer circle will need to have enough seats for the rest of your class.
This assessment's based on discussion, so we're going to have each group's reporter take a seat in the inner circle. You can help them begin and maintain a discussion about the previous activity by asking targeting questions, such as, was Greece truly a democracy? Samuel?
Then, each reporter from each group will answer the question in turn.
If the students are keeping the conversation going and staying focused on the topic, it's fine to let them talk.
But remember, only the students in the inner circle should be speaking. Once each reporter has spoken at least 2 to 3 times, have the reporter tag out to another one of their group members from the outer circle. Kyle, you're next.
The new group member will now be in the inner circle and should make at least one statement before tagging out.
When each group member has participated by speaking in the fishbowl, your formative assessment is complete.
Let's go back to the studio and talk to Ryan about some other important group considerations. We are back in the studio with Ryan. Ryan, thanks for being here.
Hey, Kyle.
So today we're talking about student groups. want to get into age differences a little bit. Would a high school group look and function the same as an elementary school group?
I mean, it's still a group of students, but other than that, I would imagine that it would look and work a little differently. Most notably is in the teacher involvement in the group. As an elementary school teacher with groups, you've really got to be involved. You've got to make sure those groups are completing what you've given them. You've got to make sure that they are able to get materials and that they clean them up right and that they're sharing. Certain things like that can really eat into group time. I imagine you didn't have to do too much of that in high school. Maybe you did.
No, not a whole lot. So if we're talking about, teacher choice, we talked a little bit about some options that a teacher has when they're forming groups. But a teacher doesn't always have a choice, right?
That's true.
And sometimes you have to adapt to that. So can you give us a little bit of suggestions about how to adapt?
Sure. A group that you might not get a choice in, usually that's one where students have been grouped based on a common score on an assessment, right? So you have a bunch of students who are functioning at a similar level. And so one way that you want to handle that, and one strategy for making that work is, first of all, you've got to differentiate by material. You've got to make sure that you have a material that's appropriate for that level of student based on the assessment. And of course, there's always behavior management challenges with groups you don't make, because a lot of times you may have students in there that you would never have put in the same group. And so, you make the adjustment quickly. You may alter some rules. And again, you've got to be involved until that group is rolling along.
Yeah, great. So, when you're thinking about lesson planning and you're looking at what's coming up and your activities that you want to do, how do you determine what should be a group activity, what maybe is best as pairs, and what even is better as an individual?
I think for me, it always comes down to the same two factors. I love doing group work, and certainly it can be really fun and very tempting to do a whole lot of. But that first factor is time. We have a lot of material to get through as teachers in a given year, and sometimes groups just aren't the most time-effective way. And then the other thing is, I always try to keep in mind what is the most effective strategy for the learner, to learn the material, to have time to practice it. And again, groups sometimes aren't the best method for that. Now, when you have things that are begging for a student discussion or things, content or process skills that are experiential, problem-based, inquiry science, those things are always great for groups. So in those times, I might be willing to give up a little of the time.
Right. Great. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
You're very welcome.
Understanding how to get the most out of student groups begins with being a good group member yourself. Team, how can we make sure that we're fulfilling our group roles?
Teaching can be very stressful and very time-consuming, but you need to remember one of the most important teams you're on, your family and friends. Building and maintaining social bonds with those close to us is essential to managing the stress in our lives. Find time to eat together, do the things that you love together, and keep in touch with those people who bring you happiness.
Both you and your family are members of a larger community. Make plans to support local business, volunteer to help those in need, and enjoy a festival in your area. Making meaningful contributions will help you to understand your role as a vital member of your community.
And a huge part of the community is your school. When you're the only adult in your classroom, it's easy to feel alone. But remember that you are part of a teaching staff, a professional learning community, and you are supported by administrators who want to see you succeed. Working together with other professionals is a recipe for success.
There's nothing like a good team. And this goes for student groups too. Hey, I get it. Student groups can present unique challenges outside of traditional instruction. But when managed properly, you can create an engaging learning experience that increases student participation in your lesson and teaches your students about valuable professional partnerships. Today, we've talked about multiple ways to manage your groups to ensure productivity and effectiveness. Now you know about creating groups, assigning roles, following task sheets, developing rules and procedures, and having meaningful whole class formative assessments. So now that you have the tools to manage groups successfully, put them into place, design some engaging student activities, and make your own outstanding teams. I know that I'm thrilled to have mine. Thank you, and I hope you'll join us for the Q&A.
All right, thanks for watching and for the great questions we've been getting in the chat, our social media channels, and emails. We're going to answer as many of these as we can today. Remember, if you have any questions about how to manage student groups, put them in the chat and we'll answer them live. Joining us today for the Q&A is, as always, the host of Launch Your Classroom Live, Kyle Pope. Kyle, that's a great team you got there.
It is quite simply the best.
And also joining us today is one of our guest hosts. She's an expert on work-life balance. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, let's take a look at our first question. Rishabh asks, what if some students don't participate? Kyle?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is certainly a concern when you have groups. That's why we really put a lot of emphasis on having those group roles. So if you have a kid that, doesn't really like to talk a whole lot, this is a perfect person to make your organizer, to keep track of how things are going, to make sure that they have the materials. That way they don't have to do a lot of talking in the group, and they certainly don't have to share out to the wider group. So great time to have a role and to encourage them to just fulfill that portion of the group work. Thank you so much.
Okay, and our next question is from Marisol. What is the best group size? Heather, do you have any thoughts on that?
Hi Marisol, thank you for your question. So the ideal group size would be 4. This kind of coincides with the roles that we discussed, the 4 roles that we discussed in the episode. So that's the leader, the organizer, the recorder, and the reporter. However, if you have a larger class size and have to have larger groups, then you can create those supplemental or specialized roles that we talk about in the episode. And if you have a smaller class and need maybe a smaller group size, then you can maybe combine some of those roles.
Okay, thank you, Heather. We have another question. This is from Luca. What if 2 students in an assigned group don't get along? Kyle, do you have any experience with this?
Yeah, that's always a concern. I think the first thing you need to do is consider how much do they or don't they get along. So does it look like something that may turn into a huge conflict and be a big distraction? Certainly if you fear that it might become something physical, if they're just, have this shared history and are put in this group together and you didn't know about it before, that is something that you want to change. But most of the time, if it's just a little personality conflict or, some students complaining, I really don't want to work with them or something of that nature, then, you just need to be frank with them and say, sometimes, in the real life, you got to work with some people that you may not want to. It's a possibility. So I want you guys to give it your best effort. If you keep up strong group work, then I'll make some considerations in the future to move you. But make them work for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. We've got a question here from Thea. I want to use my regular classroom rules for group rules too. Is this okay? Is that okay, Heather?
So you will need group rules that are, more specific to the group activity that you're doing. So, for example, if you have a classroom rule that states that students need to raise their hand before speaking, this would make it really difficult for student collaboration in the group activity. So instead, you'd probably have a specific group rule regarding, the specific voice levels. So that's kind of that conversational level that we talked about in the episode, when they're working in their groups. And so, classroom rules are always in effect, unless they're otherwise specified in those group rules. And of course, those rules are going to be placed in the group activity folder for easy reference.
All right. We have another question here. This is from Beckinkosi. How can I manage small groups given limited time? Kyle?
Yeah, this is wonderful. So this is all done in your planning time, right? If you're creating activities that can replace your direct instruction, then you're not really taking away from that instructional time. You're letting students find out that information on their own. Those are wonderful group activities. But if you're kind of doing something that's more of a reinforcement activity based on instruction, which is certainly a great use of small groups as well, that's when you need to set out your timers. You can even put this on your task sheet. This step 1 is to be completed in 2 minutes. And then you set up a classroom timer at the front of the room and you say, all right, we're going to start task number 1 right now. And then the timer will count down. They'll be able to look at it. And then once that's complete, you move on to the next step. You're like, step 2 is going to be 3 minutes. So here's 3 minutes on the timer. So you can manage it in that way if you want to. And I think that will help you out a lot with the time.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Here we've got a question from Jean. How do you handle students who don't want to participate in the fishbowl activity? Heather?
Hi, Sean. So a really great thing about the fishbowl activity is that at the end of the regular group activity, the students have this product available to them that they worked on throughout that activity. And so that allows them to just be fully prepared to make a statement about it. And so that preparation, should hopefully be enough to get students to participate. Now, if you have a student who still doesn't want to participate, then you could let them know that maybe that would affect their participation grade. Maybe they wouldn't get a participation grade for that day. Or, you could provide them with an alternative. So for this, potentially you could have the student take notes during the fishbowl activity, and then afterwards, they'd write down 3 facts that they learned from the other groups that they reported. And then they can turn that in for potentially a substitute grade. Sometimes there's specific circumstances as to why a student isn't participating. And so, it could be beneficial to just consider those alternatives for participation grades.
Okay. Got another one coming in. This one's from Arnie. Can we use rubrics in evaluating the group's performance? Kyle?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the preferred method. Honestly, if you can create a rubric, and I know sometimes they can be time consuming, but if you can create one in advance and give it to the group along with the rest of their materials in that folder that we showed earlier in the show, then they know exactly what type of quality of work that you are looking for. It's really clearly communicated to them at this point. And for you on the back end, it's a lot easier to grade these assignments and be fair across every single group. So that's a great suggestion, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Arnie. Thank you.
And here we have one from Luciano. How frequently should I change up my groups? Heather?
So, there's really no set standard for how frequently you should do this. If you have students who are working really harmoniously together, they're turning in, great high quality work, and if you got a class that overall is really happy, then there may not be a need to change the groups. But, if you feel that there are activities that need that differentiation, then you might make a group that's more homogeneous instead of the heterogeneous. So you'd want to base this on your own observations and just the needs for the lesson, while also considering that level of student achievement.
All right, thanks, Heather. Here we've got another question from Rishabh. What if some students couldn't express their ideas in English as a foreign learner? Kyle?
Hey, this is a great question, and this is where your differentiation is going to come in place. Also, consideration of group and group members. This might be a time where you want to create some homogeneous groups so these students can, especially if it's something really high level critical thinking, so these students can express their ideas to one another if they all speak the same language. Of course, you're not going to want to do this all the time, because part of the benefit of a heterogeneous group is that these students can practice their English language, for example. So you'll also want to give them the opportunity to maybe give them some preparation in advance, maybe give them the same documents but in their own language so they can have some time to prepare for this group activity when they are in a heterogeneous group. And then also, allow them, as part of this differentiation, to write out their ideas in English, maybe in just like bullet point form or something like that they can talk off of or even share to the group so they can see what they're writing about. And these are some different ways that they can express their ideas in those groups. But thank you so much for that question.
Okay, we've got one here from Olga. Do you need to grade the task sheet? Heather?
Yeah, that's a good question, Olga. So you don't have to grade the task sheet, but you could include it as part of the group grade. That just kind of helps to hold students accountable for completing it. The main function of this task sheet is for the teacher to monitor how far along students are in the process, and that every student is actively participating in the activity. So if you do decide to grade the task sheet, then don't put a lot of weight on it. You'd probably do something more along the lines of 5% of the total grade versus something like 20% or 50%.
All right, thanks for that answer, Heather. And here we've got another one from Becky Nkosi. How can I assess group performance, for example, if I'm to award marks? Kyle?
Yeah, so this is just grade it like any other assignment. It's up to you exactly how that you want to do that. But yes, if you're giving them a big group activity, you're definitely going to want to grade it. For me personally, I like to pull out single grades and group grades. So if I'm looking at that task sheet, for example, and I see that you have a group member that maybe only did one part of the task sheet where everybody else is doing 4 or 5 parts of the task sheet, that student who contributed less to the group would get a lower individual grade that I would factor in with the group grade. So that was my attempt to still make it fair to everyone in the group, so the ones who are doing a lot of work don't get penalized, and they get a bonus for actually participating more within the confines of the group. But yeah, you should definitely be grading large group activities like this. Thank you.
Okay, this one's probably going to be our last question of the day. Claudia asks, some teachers do this, but do you group students according to their ability? Kyle, have you ever done this?
Yeah, I do, and this is part of differentiation also. I mean, sometimes when you might have some struggling learners and then you may have some advanced learners, you will want to challenge them. I didn't use groups exclusively like this. This was just one of the group types that I would use. Maybe every 2 or 3 weeks I would have a group like this, but it was apart from my regular groups, which I much prefer the heterogeneous groups because I like the diversity, I like the benefit of peer tutoring, I like the different ideas that come in with heterogeneous groups. But yes, certain times there is a benefit to having students with their own ability, and sometimes, as Ryan had stated during the interview earlier, these are prescribed, these are mandated to have some groups like that. So those are just some things to consider. Thank you, Claudia.
All right, everyone, that's all the questions we have time for today. In our next episode, we'll be taking a look at student devices in the classroom. We'll cover both how to control their use from a classroom management perspective, as well as provide tips on how student technology can be used for learning. To get the most out of our next episode, make sure you use the link in the description below to head over to Amazon.com and check out our Launch Your Classroom ebook series. These ebooks are packed with tips, infographics, instructional videos, and so much more. And remember, to stay up to date on all the free professional development that EPI offers, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and while you're at it, click the bell icon to receive notifications when we're live. Launch Your Classroom will return soon. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.